Thank you, Nick. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Thank you, Image Text Ithaca /Cornell. There's 2 slides at the beginning that are just, before I begin, that are just a kind of collection of Whitney Hubbs images. And I just wanted to give a little bit more context before I began the reading. So Nick asked Whitney and I to kind of work together on this blind date series, and I was familiar with Whitney's work but had not kind of met her personally. And so we had an initial conversation, a phone call, and talked about all sorts of weird things. And it was kind of like a blind date. We talked for maybe an hour or 2 on the phone, learning all about each other's lives. And it was really that conversation that directly inspired the text that I'm about to read. So if we go forward, these are some of Whitney's photographs and some of the images that she was telling me about on the phone. And go forward one more, and go forward one more, and then I'll begin. There are days she can't stand for him to touch her. There are days when the rain falls into the backyard variously, at a murderous slant or in a fine weave. There are days when her love is criminal. There are days of lethargy and days of haste. There are hours of eternal spelunking. There are words that sound like, come here, come here, come here. There is a hunger that tastes of blood. There is the possibility of success, to put the biscuit in the basket, so to speak. There is a vision of bright green canopy. There is a shudder that begets collapse. There is a war that never gets going. What song? Nothing is happening. It's brutalist architecture overlaid on the antiquity of your face. As far as words go, these are fine. They are not the unrelenting pressure of your fist against my fist, the idiocy of your knee against my knee. Actually, there is no forest wall to climb. Cold needle, dark pond. Let's go round again. Who knows what about the common porwheel? Cryptic plumage, a pair of large, unblinking eyes. I'm speaking of birds because I can't speak of you. I can't speak of you because my tongue is disinterred. Palms flat against the table in lazy supplication. Show your hand, show your hand. It's the sound of a commentator's voice in stereo, single channel, full throttle, on my answering machine, in my ear, in the hole inside my ear. Have you ever thought about how dark it is inside a body? She touches many people, but the way she touches you is different. The oyster bar shimmered. I shook my head. I lisped. The painter from Leipzig and some banana trees. Disinhibited. That's a word that might describe it. We don't really talk, but somehow. She was taking a bath when the notes wafted in. She liked the first song, and then she liked the second. In the end, she liked it better. She liked the one with the tightrope and the stopcock and the pocket watch. She liked the flowers half cut, the tidy snow. She thought, if there is only one life, then let it drain fast. Let the moon fall lumpenly upon the scorched asphalt. It was offered up as a form of obsession. She said yes. She said, think of how else, otherwise, gale force slamming around the insides of us. to refuse you, to empty of sound, to silence the crows in the dreary woods, to cease entirely with the business of affectation, to rid the world of vows, of anything resembling toothache or wrist twinge or mouth sore, all frisson, no copy-paste malingering, all dependence cut loose, save the weevils in the flour sack. Listen carefully. When I saw it was raining, when the droplets morphed into daggers, when the moss blanketed the cave, when I cloaked myself in outer space, when the trees turned brittle, when the playlist switched to shuffle, it was only then I got down. I'll switch.
Anna, should I bring you up or I'll call her up? So now to introduce Vanessa. Vanessa Roveto is a Los Angeles-based writer. Her previous works include Bodies from University of Iowa Press and A Women from Cool House Poets. And that's all she has to say. We're thrilled to have her reading. I have a little more to say. And we have, she'll explain, but she has a special guest to read with her.
Oh, I do. So this book features a couple of perspectives. So I'm going to have Anna Doran come up and help me. She'll be reading the part of the 19-year-old, and I'll be reading the part of the middle-aged lesbian. That is not typecasting. And there's a video that will hopefully create some sort of delightful ambient context to the state of mind in which I was writing this book. Everyone hear me? Maybe. I'll start. The giant artificial palm tree that anchors the luxury condos off Ventura Boulevard bursts into flames. Burning fronds send smoke signals upward, engulfing a helicopter in bong-ripped plumes. Blades chop through the dark-lung air. At a nearby restaurant, reality TV celebrities in summerwear plunge forks into raw kale and idly watch the complex catch fire. In the back alley of the restaurant, by the sewers, hungry street rats chew each other to death. Westward down the boulevard, closer to the Pacific shore, a pelican swallows beach glass. Ocean salt gathers itself into pyramids, preparing for a resurrection. Time dilates as the Santa Anas swipe living palm trees, bending the trunks toward the pleated grounds of manicured grass. Bored, and still feeling the effects of sleeping pills, you slowly crane your neck upward toward a strange visual. A car is suspended in the air, flying off the cliffs of Mulholland Drive. Victoria. I have this recurring dream.
Madeline. Last night, I ate cold cereal and listened to Badly Drawn Boys' first album on repeat and went to sleep at 5 a.m. At 3 p.m., I woke up in a dreadful mood. After taking a shower for what seemed like half a day, I picked up my corpse, put on my darkest sunglasses and my Gigi Allen legalized murder shirt, went to the diner on Moore Park, and installed myself in a corner booth. I ordered pancakes that I didn't eat and several cups of coffee, all of which I drank, and stared at the wood paneling, trying to imagine a different life. I thought about this one time in 11th grade when these mean girls asked why I was dressed like a lesbian camp counselor, and my knee socks were supposed to be like a French schoolgirl look, so I really felt like shit. And my twin brother Guillaume, who we all call Guy because he is rightly embarrassed by his name, drove us to the top of Mulholland to smoke weed and listen to Guns N' Roses' Don't You Cry on repeat. Guy told me I needed to be like the model Stephanie Seymour in that musical where she's at a bar and a rival chick comes over and she bitch slaps her. He told me don't cry, act like a fucking supermodel. Thinking of that, I began crying, unlike a supermodel, into a handful of cheap one-ply paper napkins. Turns out pharmaceutical drugs are not the answer to everything.
Victoria. I started having weird visualizations as a teenager. I made films in my head out of all kinds of things. A feeling, a cooked shrimp ring, smog, really compelling shit. But sometimes these films got mixed into reality, so I couldn't tell if I was in them or watching them. Eventually, I found space for it all in my head, for both of these perspectives, both of me, and I lived it over and over again. My ex, Dora, used to say I was impenetrable, a mysterious lesbian. I thought maybe she said this because of my heavy brow, my starvation rituals, my semi-permanent scowl, my weird animalistic sexuality, a gay Marlon Brando in Mutiny on the Bounty. I dumbly thought love could save mysterious, but later I realized weirdos are typically left to their own devices. I was no exception, but rather part of a long-honored tradition of mangled people who are too broken to fake it. In Mutiny on the Bounty, Brando's lover offers him words of Tahitian wisdom. Quote, Tahiti people say, you eat life or life eat you. Life is a film that never quite turns out like the trailer made you think it would. On the blurred edges of your vision is a playground, a feral dog chewing a chocolate wrapper, a couple of queer teenagers doing poppers, someone's grandpa sloping the sun over a Corona, basketball net swish, followed by demonic cheering. You're stuck in a broken lawn chair, trapped because you don't know how to get out of something. I know that people either find my eccentric behavior extremely annoying or incredibly endearing, and that there isn't really much gray area. I know that people who find me annoying generally dislike me with ease and can't stand to be around me. So I find myself surrounded by people who enjoy my weirdness, and therefore I never really get a lot of constructive criticism, except for the voices in my head. For this reason, I became a poet. At 42, I teach in Last Chance, Iowa. To my students, I am a beast of burden, a lone mule across a fence that separates me from others and their experiences, a cross-eyed and unpopular type who is a lesbian not because of any innate sexual preference, but rather because I scared all the men away with my animal moaning sounds. In any case, that's what one of my student evaluations said.
Madeline, I am 19 years old. I am temporarily, fakely blonde, and I live in the San Fernando Valley in a tract home. My father divorced my mom a few years ago and moved to the Castro in San Fran. More on why another time, and is a personal shopper for men. This is a clue. My mother, Celine, has an artistic background and won some notoriety for a painting of Julia Child being attacked by chicken legs. She turned that into a career as a home scenic designer, which means she paints murals of magical things onto the walls of the homes of wealthy people. She went a bit insane when my father left us, notably drawing feces all over the paintings in our house, signing them all Motherwell. Sometimes she dates men who we meet, sometimes she dates men who she meets only in her mind. She named me Madeline as in that annoying French child with tuberculosis. Everyone calls me mad, as in the feeling or circumstance, as in anger or insanity. I dropped out of college and moved back home after I stopped eating when my dad left us and became fully gay, no kidding, a hunger strike of sorts. I work part-time at Whole Foods and spend the rest of my time thinking my little important thoughts, as my mother likes to call them.
All the valley dwellers have become sensitive. You join them and you become a prepper too. You've gone from as if to what if. Instability brings about everyone's rampaging for jarred capers, electrolytes, boxes of instant cranberry bread. Bearing long biblical beards and thinness, you're all suddenly radical as fuck, yelling out improvised poems from cars, developing personal slogans that all amount to bereft of life. Against cloudless skies, any of the available disorders are at your disposal. The desert air crisps up the context. Thank you, Anna.
Let's go here.
Yeah.
So Emma, do you want to come up? Should we let the scenic view of Burbank play in the background as we go?
Keep Burbank.
You can look at us or look at that.
Buck sign come up? Oh, yeah. The forest lawn.
So we thought before we open it up to questions and signing by both Emma and Vanessa. We have both items available there. We thought we'd have a brief conversation about what seemed centrally linking of these two works, which has to do with I think the term we kept coming up against when we were talking the other day was self-abasement, which might be its friendly cousin, self-loathing. And I was really curious to ask Emma and Vanessa about the usefulness of that emotion or relation and the ways in which it relates to a kind of access to beauty in whatever sense you might define that term.
Okay.
I'll let you go first.
Where to start? Well, I think we were joking yesterday that I won't speak for Nick, but Emma and I sort of feel like maybe we got an MFA in conversion disorder in some ways, because there's something about the way that and now I'll speak about my work, about sort of converting trauma like into hysteria and then into beauty, or maybe it just stops at hysteria. You have to read the book to sort of decide that. But there is something about, you know, a willingness to compromise oneself. I mean, I think in my case it was like leaning in. I was like already sort of compromised in terms of the context of which this book was written, sort of in a place in my life that was sort of, the degradation was there. But there is something about dematerializing oneself was very therapeutic, and it sort of led me into something much more beautiful than the materiality of my body was sort of devastated. Sort of.
And I guess I would just say that I grew up Catholic and have a serious case of like repression and denial about my entire life and being and existence. And so I think doing this kind of translation from the inside to the outside, I mean, that's what writing is, I guess, for me, is trying to take, channel some kind of actual sense or dimension of truthfulness to myself, and then look at it and then feel repulsed and disgusted by it, but but at least kind of grateful to be able to like recognize or acknowledge it, I suppose. It's interesting that you sort of use the word beauty as an outcome or residue of the process, and I mostly feel horrified at the words that I write. I rarely find them beautiful. I mostly find them re-traumatizing. It's like, oh, here are my traumas, and now they're re-traumatizing me because I'm seeing them for the first time in daylight. So I haven't really been able to access the beauty part yet, but I recognize that in other writing that I enjoy that seems to go through a similar process of translation. I guess I'll just say that.
I'm just curious about like what strikes either of you as so erotic about compromising oneself for others.
Okay, erotic is your word. I don't know about erotic. I mean, it's very vulnerable.
Vulnerable, sure.
Yeah.
Well,
this idea about blind date, is that, sorry, what were you going to?
So there's something about like the ways of being close in both texts have to do with a kind of like putting yourself in a position of vulnerability or a position of a certain amount of helplessness before the other person, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean, desire is always in dialogue with power and power relations and power negotiations, and I think that there's something about the kind of process of writing for me that is also there's an erotics to the process of writing, in the sense that I'm in this strange power relationship with myself, almost, of like how close to some core truth of me can I approach, like how close can I get through language, because I'm not able to approach it in my everyday being in the world. And so I think that there's this undercurrent for me of like toying with myself that undergirds the writing, and then the themes of the writing or the subject or content or whatever is also kind of going to that, in this particular text, going to that place based on the dialogue with Whitney. That was very much about youth and about desire and about longing and about culture.
Well, there's a line in your text, Emma, and it was something, I'm going to get a little wrong, I could open this up and sort of scan for it, but it was something about how lonely it is, how dark a body is, how inside, and something about that loneliness, just the desire for me, or the erotics of it, are internal, right? And the thing about these two perspectives, they're also both fraternal twins. So they proliferate, and it's also recursive. And I guess that's how I create a kind of romanticism. You know, it's not just, it's born out of loneliness, but desire creates subjectivity in a way that, the success sort of destroys it, right? So there's always a desiring subject, and there's desire from within, and it's also coming from without, but also from within the body, like that feeling. So
We talked about, when the three of us were talking the other day, we talked about the fractured self as well, and I feel like there's a way in which the fractured self is a more generous version to give to somebody else. Unfortunately, even if it might be less pleasant to be, it allows like a multifaceted incompleteness or something.
I feel like most people don't want to take on people's fractured selves, though. I don't know if you have that experience.
I have that experience. Yeah, I mean, in ters of other people not wanting to take on my fractured stuff. Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. No, that was nobody wanted to deal with that, which is completely fine. Like no one needs to deal with that. But yeah, no, I think it's destabilizing. We take for granted a coherent self, and that we're not just like a bunch of kidneys and a somatic archive of trauma and memory and so on. I think it's that lack of coherency that does, and that gets back to sort of like the title of this, the abject, right? Which or at least in my case, I try to use humor to get away. Like that's my effort to dematerialize or get away from like the excremental aspects of myself.
I'm jealous of the humor aspect. It's something I've never been able to do.
Just a coping mechanism.
It all is.
Yeah, it always.
I'm wondering if people have questions or comments for either of the authors.
Okay, I'll try. Good question. I mean, I can think of a variety of reasons. Los Angeles is a funny city, right? Because people often come here to be someone else, which is very strange. People go to New York to like be a New Yorker. People come to LA to get away from themselves. So everyone's a little bit of a composite or a persona or a person masquerading as a persona, and then they kind of merge, and then God knows what happens then. But there is something, I think, and just something so destabilizing about this geography where you often don't see people for long. You're in your car. There's just always this kind of remove. And that makes me feel a little fractured at times, It's because this becomes like a health hazard, You're just sort of, so I don't know. I would just say something about the landscape and maybe traditionally the type of person who might be drawn to Los Angeles, potentially.
I wish Burbank was still on the screen.
Burbank,
behind.
yes.
I guess I would just say that I moved to LA from London like 11 years ago now, and I moved here just completely by myself, and I didn't know anyone, and kind of fell into a way of living in this city that kind of understanding the material conditions of LA are like pretty harsh if you come here with not very much, and trying to kind of find your way through the place without a car even when you first arrive, and just how hot like all the cement is all the time when you're walking for hours because you don't have a car. And you know, there's something about you know, I don't know if it's specific to Los Angeles really, but at least for me personally, it was about being in a, like moving somewhere, relocating myself independently, and trying to understand how I could kind of survive here and make a life here. And I think that for that reason, the sort of architecture of the city and the conditions of the city make their way into the work quite often.
Well, I mean, you know, funny story. My dad died during a global pandemic. So don't worry, this book is actually very funny. But that sort of loneliness and alienation, I guess there are a lot of ways to translate that. And for me, it just made me more desirous. I mean, it could have pushed me in all kinds of directions, but to me, just the groundedness of sort of writing and imagination and thinking, it was like I was desiring more contact with the world. But there were, of course, as we all know, many months and in fact almost years in some cases where we had no contact, you know. So I was just trying to find ways to short circuit contact, I guess, in some ways. And the amazing thing about this started out mostly as a book of poetry, but that almost felt too abstract in a moment where I actually needed more contact. And so I sort of transubstantiated it into a novella, which felt like I would reach more people. So that was sort of my way of kind of getting to that.
And I think I just have an immense like dislocation from my own self. You know, like I feel like we were talking about the decomposed self or the fractured self, and I feel like often I feel like it's difficult for me to trust even my own thoughts or impressions or feelings or opinions, if I even have any. And so the act of really trying to lock in a position or like locate myself in relation to myself is, I guess, part of what the writing is or why I do it. Maybe that's why LA is a good city for me. I don't know.
One thing that struck me about both texts is I feel like there's a way in which coming undone is like it's like a gesture of love in a way, and like creates intimacy, like the willingness to come undone with someone else or to someone else. That seemed, I don't know if either of you have thoughts about that, but it seemed like a current that ran through both texts.
I'm like going back there, I'm like, oh, that was such a mess. But yeah.
But like the family members in your text, Vanessa, like they find a kind of closeness to each other.
Yeah, they do. Or I was trying to find closeness, right? You know what I mean? Because it was almost like playing a dollhouse, right, too? Because we all were really fractured in that, you know, during that time. But the willingness to come on, I mean, you can only repair through having gone through something destructive. There's nothing to repair then. So it was almost just like, and then of course you could just kind of leave it as is. But to me, it felt like an opportunity to do something reparative and repairing my own heart too, right? You know, there was something too that I needed some repairing. you know, because aspects of me were lost and I couldn't find her. I'm like, I don't know where she went, but she's gone. So, you know, this was the only way. It was like, again, sort of recomposing the self, you know, and a willingness to go there too, of course, you know. Sorry, Uncle Buck just distracted me, but speaking of abject.
I mean, I guess I would just say that I think the willingness to reveal your collapse or to come undone with someone is the interesting part of it for me comes back to the sort of like power differential that plays out in those or through those interactions, and you know, the kind of burden that we place on one another when we become real with one another is really serious and kind of has these consequences that we don't really account for. I think in the way that we organize our lives, like it's suddenly everything changes when you become real with someone, and it does something strange and difficult and not always positive, and yet it feels like some kind of necessary part of claiming humanity. And I think artists and poets and, you know, people more able to or more willing to go there, maybe, you know, than others in our social space. But I'm not really answering your question. I'm just thinking aloud.
It was a pretty open question. Any more final questions or comments? All right. So I think we'll take some time. Well, first to thank Vanessa and Emma.
Thank you.
We also have copies of both projects available for sale here, and they are available to sign for the next few minutes as well. So thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming. Thank you. Thank you.